My name is Alex Anderson, and I will be discussing the importance of questioning queer linguistics. My thesis for this project was, queer linguistics has transformed over time to be more accepting with the advancement of LGBTQ+ topics. My thesis and primary research led me to my main research question: does media and public opinion have an effect on the linguistics surrounding the LGBTQ+ community? Important points I researched to find an answer to my research question were: first, did the study of queer linguistics evolve through the gay rights movement of the 70s and 80s or after? Second, if not, when did the revival of queer linguistics occur? And finally, after the first two questions were answered, how the internet affected queer linguistics and changed words. Before one looks into the introduction of queer linguistics to see change in public opinion, one must first look at the larger change in the more frequently studied topic of queer theory. According to Heiko Matzenbacher and Martin Stegu, both writers for the peer-reviewed journal Discourse and Society, queer theory evolved as a reaction to the gay and lesbian rights movements in the USA in the late 1970s and 1980s. Queer theory is the study of sexuality and discusses the two main givens society sets from birth: male versus female and heterosexual versus homosexual. Based on this information, we know that queer linguistics studies became relevant after the study of queer theory started in the 1970s and 1980s. Now that the background of queer linguistics has been discussed, we may venture into the revival of queer linguistics as public opinion changed in the 2000s. Some may argue queer language became public after the gay rights revolution in the early 1970s. However, with the criminalization of queer nightlife and other political factors, it is clear to see that the queer community still had restrictions that caused the language to remain unchanged after the gay rights movement for some time. I argued that the revival of queer language came about after the legalization of queer marriage across the globe, the most notable decision being the Oberfeld v. Hodges case that legalized gay marriage in all 50 states. This case occurred in 2015. This evolution of the LGBTQ+ culture and the legalization of gay marriage pulled queer linguistics into the light because most queer activity became legal and publicly accepted. The need of queer language to hide queer activity was no longer necessary, since both public opinion and law now protected LGBTQ+ individuals rather than leaving them stranded. It is here that we look into our first example of queer language evolving. The word queer has had many meanings throughout time. However, according to Matzenbacher and Stegu, quote, while it was originally a highly derogative synonym of homosexual, it lost, at least in LGBTQ+ friendly context, some of its negative meaning potential and came to be used as a positive umbrella term for non-heterosexual identities, end quote. The word queer may be a single word. However, it was the first word to truly show the shift of public opinion regarding the LGBTQ+ community. The changing of the word queer from a derogative term to an umbrella term shows the start of public acceptance of the LGBTQ+ community. The internet played a large role in bringing queer language to the forefront of society. According to Edward Kessler, quote, the internet and social media are primary authorities for information, with the traditional media, radio, television, newspaper, and the cinema, a distant second, end quote. This transformation of public knowledge created both a safe space for the LGBTQ+ community to become informed, but also encouraged discussion between the masses. The National Public Radio and National Television both have one thing in common that the internet lacks: government regulation. The government regulation of both the National Public Radio and television caused a block on the use of queer language, with the exception being when it was used in a comedic or stereotypical format. Queer language did make it into films and documentaries such as Paris is Burning, Looking for Langston, Stranger by the Lake. However, some of these films were created in more modern times. Historical queer films made before the queer revolution of the 1970s only survive in record and are very complicated to get a hold of, and are thus obsolete in this discussion. Unlike the National Public Radio or television, the internet offers arguably better information regarding the LGBTQ+ community, with little regulation from the government. Kessler says, quote, individuals communicate their own interpretations of events and texts, rather than rely on the accounts of their leaders, religious or political. This new way of communication removes the figurative middleman. The internet also offers a new connection that both the National Public Radio and television lacked: one-to-one, two-way, and multi-way connection. These new connections started on underground sites that then became mainstream, such as Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, etc. This allowed for the discussion around the LGBTQ+ community to grow and encouraged queer linguistics to not only spread within the community, but allowed for the introduction of queer linguistics to a historically heterosexual landscape. This transformation of online public spaces helped to shape the 21st century queer spaces and encourage the documentation of queer language which had been unimportant in the past. The internet and media encouraged a society that placed a focus on becoming more accepting of the LGBTQ+ society. After conducting my research, I looked back at my research question: does media and public opinion have an effect on the linguistics surrounding the LGBTQ+ community? And my final answer is yes. Media does have a substantial effect on the linguistics surrounding the LGBTQ+ community. Media, social media to be exact, help change queer linguistics from being a derogatory language to being a more accepting and uplifting language. Throughout the invention of the internet, major changes in public understanding and acceptance of LGBTQ+ topics and politics occurred. My final solution is to keep accepting queer terms in modern culture and encourage the use of new queer terms rather than older, more derogatory queer language. The implications to this solution is that it's an everyday fix to a problem that is luckily already being handled by a major proportion of society. The limitations to this solution are that some locations and societies are behind on the acceptance of LGBTQ+ culture and will need more time to change and fully accept queer individuals. Thank you.
Alex, thanks. Okay, the first of two questions. First one, what information did you need that you weren't able to find or locate, and then how'd you go about trying to find it?
Well, the old records of queer linguistics are mostly based on books, and a lot of it was underground and unofficial research. So I tried to find sort of the main author of historical queer linguistics, and I sort of found one in Julia P. Stanley, who comes up a lot in my paper. However, she is unfortunately passed, so I had a lot of questions that I wanted to ask her that I wasn't able to, so I sort of had to formulate my own speculations about where I thought queer linguistics was headed in the future and how it had evolved throughout time.
Okay, thanks. So then what advice would you give for other researchers who consider this topic?
I'd say you have to keep it broad, but you also have to focus on what you're particularly interested in. So I looked a lot at the specific words of the past in my paper and sort of brought them into the future and where I thought they sort of connected from the 1970s and 80s and then how they sort of evolved into the early 2000s.
Okay, all right, well, thank you.